I'm gonna try and keep this relatively entertaining. If you guys have questions during this, like I have a bunch of different topics, like feel free to ask while we're on a topic and let's discuss whatever you want, right? And I will probably, like I said, there's free weed up here, so we will take some breaks. So I'm not gonna stand here and talk your ear off for an eternity. So my background, I'm Gordy. I work for Cutting Edge Solutions. I've been growing since I was 13. I'm from northern Michigan. I harvested my first successful plant when I was 14. So I've been doing it basically my whole life. I have grown in indoors, greenhouse, outdoors, guerrilla style, hydro, drip, NFT, aero systems. I mean, if you can probably have played with it at some point in time, I've probably grown a couple hundred plants in it. So that's kind of where my background comes from. I'm not formally educated through any university or anything like that. I have read an immense amount of textbooks throughout my life. That's kind of where I've gained my data. So everything that I have kind of trying to teach you guys is based out of one college textbook or another. And I'm going to try and simplify it down so it makes sense for everybody. Cutting Edge Solutions is the company that pays me to do this, so I'm going to talk about that. I'm not going to make it an infomercial though, so I'm going to include the program while I'm teaching you about each stage of life rather than trying to run through the whole thing. But we are a super clean fertilizer that's originally designed for cannabis. We never tested on anything else, period. We use pharmaceutical and food grade inputs. No dyes, no hormones, no PGRs, extremely low heavy metals. We know you're going to grow weed with it. We know you're going to smoke it, and we formulate the nutrient with that in mind. So we use third-party labs to burn flower and leaf material to see what's actually left over in the smoke, right? And then we are formulating the fertilizer to change that so that the smoke content has less nutrient left over in it. So it's cleaner, smoother. We focus on terpene content, bag appeal, colors, stuff like that. We don't really care about big, goofy green nuggets that are gonna make you grow 30% more. We try and grow really high quality craft cannabis as our focus. All of our products are biologically friendly, so we recommend teas and fungus and anything else that you'd like to inoculate with. The store is going to actually start brewing our compost tea specifically and have that available for you guys. So that'll be like a once a week, they brew that. I think we're going to sell quarts of it or something. But I guess let's kind of get into it. So we are a micro grow and bloom, 3-part, very similar to the way that GH was originally built. We just don't add in the dyes and everything else, and we use as high quality inputs as we can. Having the 3 parts allows you to buy the one package kit and change it for every stage of plant life without needing to continue to buy new bottles for this stage. We don't sell PK boosters because we don't add nitrogen to our bloom product, so we're not selling you a bunch of extra bottles. You can literally use this for a bunch of different stages, including clone, right? And then we have a list of additives, which are additives. You don't have to use them, but they do definitely increase terpene content, crystal content, color, flavor, and smells. And we've had third-party labs help us develop these products for the last 25 years now to actually do that. So that is kind of that. So let's get into the environment. This is indoor gardening, obviously, so you are in control of everything, right? And it's a lot more set points than people give it credit for. The environment is 65% of this ballgame, or maybe 70% of it, right? People put a lot of emphasis into nutrient and a lot of emphasis into media, right? Which bag is gonna fix it for you, right? It's not that. Your tent needs to be, or your room needs to be a certain environmental set points all the time to keep that plant healthy, happy, and moving water through it. So one thing I wanted to touch on that I'm sure everybody has heard of at this point is VPD, which is a vapor pressure deficit. Basically that means what is the holding capacity the air has for water? How much moisture can we hold? When temperature goes up, we hold more water, and when temperature comes down, we lose water. So that's why we have dew in the morning, right? We get to that really cold temperature overnight, all the humidity falls out and creates dew, right? The same thing is happening in your tent. Whether we're talking about a 5-degree change, 12-degree change, it doesn't matter. We're losing moisture or we're gaining moisture. So what does that mean for growing wheat, right? So when you look at a leaf, right, I don't have a slideshow for you guys, but this is a side angle of a leaf, right? We have pores on the top of this leaf that the plant is using to breathe, just like your lungs do, right? So it's drawing in moisture, losing moisture, it's changing air out. This loses moisture out to the atmosphere. Plant drinks it up through the root system, it goes up through the plant, out the leaf. That is the way that it breathes and respirates. It's a loss of moisture. So if we can manipulate the moisture in the air, we can either make the plant drink more because it's easier for it to push moisture into a dry environment, or we can make it drink less by increasing the humidity, making it harder to push that moisture out. That's why if a room gets too hot and dry, your plant wilts. It's not necessarily because it needed more water than what was there. It wasn't able to keep up with the moisture loss in the leaf, so it wilted. And it's more a response to the environment than it is a response of the water. Same thing for somebody's room who's too wet all the time. Media doesn't dry out, and it's because the plant isn't drinking, because it's not losing that moisture through the leaf, right?
So is trimming gonna affect that?
Trimming will affect that, but it changes the amount of perspiration, we'll say, that the leaf is putting out into the air. So if your tent is super full, you're gonna have a harder time battling humidity because the plant is essentially sweating more. We're losing more air into the atmosphere. Yeah. Whereas when we have little plants, humidity isn't as hard to control. That is where, when you're in a confined space, pruning can help. But pruning I will get into a little bit more. That is a process that has been pushed on you guys forever online that is of no benefit to your plant, right? There's a certain amount of pruning that will help with air transfer around the inside, prevent fungus and stuff, but we're trying to grow a solar panel, right? Every leaf is a new solar panel creating more energy for more flower sites. So the more you pick them off, the less energy through photosynthesis is occurring inside of the plant. So when they tell you, like, you should pick down to 3 or 4 nodes at the tip and let it come back, why would you burn through all of the nutrient that's stored up in that plant before it runs a 9-week marathon, right? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Right. Whereas if we eliminate a few bottoms and a few middles, so we have better air circulation in the temp, that's a healthier situation, and it's a reasonable loss, right? So I'm gonna get into that a little bit more. I'm not gonna teach you guys the equation for VPD because it's unnecessary. You're all gonna go on your phone and look it up, and it's gonna tell you to have your room at 82 degrees and 65% humidity, right? And we're gonna lower that down, right? So there's no need for you guys to learn these advanced equations for nothing. Basically what we want is we want a temp and humidity, right? Beginning stages of flower, we want a high temp and a high humidity. And as we move on, we want to stagger down, right? That's it, right? What we're trying to do is the temperature is high and the humidity is high in the beginning. It keeps them perky. That's where we talk about 82 degrees, 65% humidity, right? That is going to keep them moving the nutrients that are necessary for veg and stretching. So we want them to fill that tent up, or whatever space. We want to fill up the square footage of our tent, right? So that's why that temperature is important, because they are eating rapidly, they're losing more moisture. And then as we progress further into our flowering cycle, we're gonna start staging that stuff down, because we're thinking, what happens outside in the fall? Temperatures chill off, light intensity goes down. That's what we're trying to mimic. This perfect stasis of 85, 65, everybody wants to run, start to finish, is a perfect August day all the way through December. Doesn't happen, right? It's not built for that. It's built for lots of light intensity and heat in the summer when it's growing, lowering light intensity, lowering temperature, lowering humidity through the fall. So that's what we're trying to replicate. that's gonna cause you more ripening, better quality product, less green flavor at the end. A lot of people, when they're in the beginning, they push too much nitrogen or they don't control their environment, and you have those harsh hay flavors. Everybody has gone through it, right? I grew a lot of weed that tastes like hay for a long time, right? That's just a part of it, right? But we are not following these natural cycles that are happening outdoor. There's a reason and a rhyme behind all of it. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the perfect day for our plant every day in our environment, but we're trying to do it seasonally, right? You're just controlling the season. Temperature swings and trying to balance it. The more your plant grows, the more cubic footage it's taking up in your space, the harder it is for you to control. That is the one downside of tents, right? Super nice that you guys can pop them up and have a clean, nice little contained space, but the bigger your plants are, right, the more nutrient they're taking up, the more air they're moving, the more they're breathing into the room, and the more space they take, so the hotter the room becomes. That is kind of where that, like, picking for airflow and stuff like that, there's a balance to all of this, right? And we all kind of learn it for our spaces, because all of our houses are different temperatures and different humidities, so I can't tell you what's perfect for you, right, because your house is a little different. So how do I know if I have enough airflow in my environment, right? And the answer is you probably don't. But the steps to figuring this out, the old technique I was taught back in the day that has stuck with me everywhere is called the Zippo technique. A Zippo is windproof, right? We all have one somewhere. If you can move a Zippo in your tent around and that flame stands up, you have a dead spot. There's no dead spots outside, right? So these are really good indicators as you move around where my dead spots are at, where I should point fans at, how I should change my airflow. The other one that is common that most people don't realize is if you look in the bottom corners of your tent and you have condensation, that is another really good sign that you're not moving enough air around, because you have pockets on the bottom where that dew is allowed to settle and build, and that is a lack of airflow problem. Those are the two really easiest ways to look if you have enough airflow. A Bic lighter does not work as well because it blows out, unfortunately, when you go home to try it. Lighting and light intensity. And again, if you guys have any questions, I can stop. I'm just trying to. The lights that are on the market nowadays are too much for weed, right? There's a limit. So where weed is from in Afghanistan, Central Asia, Pakistan, Nepal, the light intensity during the summer is just like Michigan or Ohio or anywhere else, where we get about that 1,500 to 1,600 ppfd on the canopy, right? But they grow them over the winter. So cannabis wants 950 to 1,200 light intensity. If you don't have a meter, my best suggestion for you is to turn your lights down to 60 or 80%. The intensity is too much. What happens when we have too much?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No 100% then.
No, the 100% is really good for certain set stages. Like if we're bulking flower in the middle, we're between weeks 3 and weeks 5 or so, right? And we're trying to really get them to swell and put on shape and size.
Okay.
We want to turn our lights up, right? Because we're going to give them that intensity, but we want to build up to it. And then when we hit that week 5 and we start into the ripening phase, we want to come back down again.
We're gonna come back down.
Because it's fall, right? It's in your back room, but it's fall all of a sudden because it's week 5 and we need to start bringing that light intensity back down. But the lights are too strong. We moved over to LEDs. They didn't have the right spectrum. I'm sure everybody saw the purple lights that came out or have seen pictures of the purple lights. Those didn't work, still don't work to this day. But all of the other ones are too strong. There's no need. Most of these big lights that you guys want to run, these huge big lights, are meant for an overhead day in a commercial facility. Because unfortunately, all of this equipment is designed for a commercial facility. It's not designed for you guys. So when they're like, put this light up and run it at 100%, they mean run it at 100% 5 to 6 feet above the canopy, right? Because that distance and gap gives you that lower light intensity.
There's an app you can get, it's called Photo.
Okay, yep.
It works great. We tested it against a high priced meter here and it was.
And it just uses your camera,
Just
essentially?
use your camera on your phone, but you gotta make sure you select the right light. You know, you can select everything from the sun to a compact fluorescent.
Okay.
And then you have to build a little light diffuser out of a piece of paper,
Mm-hmm.
computer paper. Just kind of wrap it around your phone and then use a piece of Scotch tape. You gotta slide that over your camera so it spreads the light out when light hits it.
Yeah, so there's clearly ways that you guys, if you don't have one of the expensive meters, is it probably on YouTube or something, they can probably find that?
It gives you a good, I mean, it may not be spot on.
Right,
Close
but
enough.
close.
It gives you an idea of where you're.
Yeah,
Close enough, right?
but that really, the lighting thing has advanced so far. The other problem that you start seeing with super intense light, the first thing that's gonna show up is the petiole of the leaf here, which is the stem that holds the leaf on. You know how there's a little stem that holds on every single fan leaf? That's called a petiole. That's not specific to weed, that's just a general horticultural term for a stem for a leaf, right? So the petiole, what its job is to move nutrient in and out of the leaf. It's one of the only places in that plant that the nutrient is capable of moving back and forth, right? Is through that petiole material. What you'll notice is the tops of it will start to turn red and purplish, right? That's because you're losing too much magnesium. That's the first thing that goes because that's moving backwards, right? So when the magnesium strips out of there, we can't make green chlorophyll anymore because magnesium balances calcium, iron, and eventually nitrogen, right? So the first sign we start seeing from too much light is this magnesium problem, which starts in the petiole and then moves into the leaf, right? Magnesium, wipe this off there. Magnesium is unbelievably important for cannabis because it regulates calcium and iron, which are what support the plant cell to create chlorophyll, create green, right? Everybody associates the green with nitrogen, which is true, but it's actually magnesium that's moving the nitrogen and the calcium around inside of the plant, right? So when we think about, let's say like a ladder leaning against the wall, right? And we got our little rungs of our ladder here. The phosphorus is on the top. It's the most insoluble. This is what we need for general plant health with roots and flower development. And phosphorus creates the enzymes that are responsible for making flower hormones. So that's why people push phosphorus. They think it builds plant material, but it actually hits a bunch of these secondary metabolic reactions inside of the plant that are not necessarily creating more flower.
And CalMag does not have that in it.
No,
right?
CalMag does not. CalMag, no matter what brand you buy, our brand or anybody else's, is calcium, magnesium, and iron. Calcium, magnesium, always in a balance of 5
So we
calcium,
need
1 magnesium.
Phosphorus.
Right? Magnesium is the first step up on this ladder. If you have a nutrient lockout, if you have a burn, if you have something funny going on, magnesium is actually your fix. It's the first step for us climbing up the ladder for the rest of the nutrient. We have a product called MagAmp, which is a magnesium sulfate that we pre-digest with bacteria, which separates the magnesium and the sulfur in the bottle and creates a mucus around them so they're separate. But what that does is it makes them extremely ionically available. So 1 or 2 mils of our magnesium product will remove most of your lockout issues, stunting, stuff like that. And it's because essentially when we have a stressor, we take away this bottom rung of this ladder, and now the rest of our nutrient can't get started on the climbing phase because that bottom step is no longer there for them to get going on. But this is the most common thing that too much lighting does. You guys will go home, you look at what you see, and you'll see, oh, I have this purpling on all of my petioles over here, and this and that. And that'll go away. Cannabis should be green. I don't care about this lie about purple weed being purple, right? There's purple leaves, but the material that makes the stem, the xylem, and the petioles are always green, regardless of the genetic, right? So when you have something that's got this constant purpling, it's more than likely because it doesn't have enough magnesium or calcium, and it just needs more. They are all different. That's the one thing that people continue to overestimate, is cannabis, seed-wise, is as different as you and your siblings are. You're both from the same parent, you're not the same person, right? So that goes with environment, food, nutrient necessity, everything. It's all slightly different. So you really have to pay attention to what you're growing. It may be a sherbet that you bought from a seed, but it's not the sherbet that made the seed, if that makes any sense. And it will never be the sherbet that made the seed, it's its own thing, right? So that's why they're all slightly different. So light intensity, like we had mentioned, clones need 200 to 400 ppfd. They do not need hardly anything. My clones sit in the side light next to my vegetable with no light above them until they root, right? At all. There's no need. The more photon intensity from the lighting that we're gonna put on top of that leaf, the more we're trying to make it use the nutrient that it doesn't have built up and that it can't access because it doesn't have a root mass, right? So it's really counterproductive to put super intense light on the clones, right? You'll notice a big increase in health and vitality of your clones just by moving them over into the side light. And then all I do is spin my tray every time I go in there. So the other side gets the light instead. Otherwise they all lean one way, right? So clones are really little. They don't need much. Like I said, there is no root for them to absorb moisture. So we don't want them sweating through their leaves. That's why the dome works. If you guys use a normal traditional dome and plug style and you're not using a cloning machine, you'll notice that if your dome is vented too far open or if you don't close it, your clones wilt. This is a prime example of that not enough moisture in the air. They're losing it out of their leaf, and because they don't have a root, they wilt right away because they can't replenish. That's why the dome is so effective, because it holds that high moisture and prevents them from leaking that moisture out into the air, right? Veg plants, as we move into veg, we do start transitioning up to higher intensity light. Veg plants normally like between 800 and 1,000 ppfd, which is somewhere around 60 to 80%, right? These lights are, like, I'm gonna keep beating it at you guys, these lights are too strong, right? You can grow more flower with super intense light, but it's going to be significantly less quality. There's a balance there, right? It's going to move more nutrition because of the light intensity. If we can keep up with the magnesium like we talked about, so that we can keep climbing the ladder every day as we're feeding, right? It will consume more, but it will not make as many of the secondary metabolites as it would have with lower light intensity that are gonna lead you to taste, smells, flower color, stuff like that. If that kind of makes any sense.
So it's basically quality over quantity.
In my opinion, for what you guys are doing, yes, right? Because you have the industry telling you you should be getting 3 pounds of light, right? But you guys don't operate $5 million buildings, right? We're hobbyists at home growing. Really what you should focus on is 1 or 2 plants. I don't care how much you smoke, right? 1 or 2 plants is gonna grow so much flower for you at home as a hobbyist, right? You should really focus on how do I make it clean, how do I make it better quality, right? Because the other aspect is if it's better quality, you're gonna smoke less, right? It's gonna take you less to get where you're going, right? Which is healthier over the long run. I mean, if it's your goal to grow a bunch of super green, huge weed and have high numbers, because that's what you want to do, like, you know, more power to you, right? But that is, like I said, it's one of the problems, is we all go on Instagram, we all follow all these people on Instagram, right, or TikTok, or whatever it is, right? And you're like, oh, they have this giant facility, and they do this, and their flower is this, they're getting 5.5 pounds of light off this, right? But look, they grow in a rocket ship, right? And you're driving around in a Toyota Corolla, right? It's not the same thing. It's not an apples to apples comparison, right? You can get the best commercial growers in the world. I don't care who your favorite commercial grower is you follow, and put them in a tent with 1 light right next to you, and you would be surprised at what they do, right? And it's because these buildings have millions of dollars in environmental controls, right? And it's hard for the average homeowner to put an AC unit, dehumidifying unit, a humidifying unit, an ozone generator, and everything else into a 5x5 tent.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right, yep, yep.
Right. So there is a lot of this that is unattainable. I don't want to say that you guys won't be able to do the same quality of flower, because you should be able to do better quality of flower, right? You should be able to put out twice the quality of what you buy at the dispensary. Even if you go to the dispensary and buy the best top shelf stuff, you should have the ability, because you only have a few plants that you can pay attention to, and it's a small little changes for you rather than big scale stuff, to put out like way better quality than anybody that's ever commercially gonna do it, right? A lot of those buds are Instagram pretty, but they're not smokable, right? That we all have gone to the dispensary and seen what they're pushing out, right? There's a lot of that generic cardboard tasting weed. And that's because those companies care about how many grams I can get in each square foot. Everything else is secondary, right? Quality goes out the window because we have to make sure all the doctors and lawyers that put money into our business are getting paid. So, you know, like I said, I have more faith in you guys putting out high quality weed than I do a $10 million building. So like, where does weed come from? Right, weed comes from Central Asia. If we look back, we find fossil deposits of hemp and cannabis pollen in Nepal dating back about 200,000 years, which puts it at the oldest point of origin that we know. Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, 32 to 41 latitude, same as Ohio, same as Southern Michigan, same as perfect band right across the US, right? They go through the same frost, they go through the same rainy cycles. It's just opposite because it's on the other side of the world, whereas our winter is in December, November, January, right? That's when they're growing their weed outdoors instead, right? That's the only real difference. It's not, I always try and demystify weed to people, right? It's not special. There's really nothing special about weed compared to tomato or anything else. It actually eats at half the strength that beets eat. So beets like a 4.5 to a 5.5 EC input all the time. Weed is like a 1.8 to a 2.5, maybe a 3 if you're really trying to push, right? It doesn't eat fancy. It doesn't eat overly heavy. It is not doing anything special that cucumbers aren't doing, right? It just makes the compound we can all get high on, so we've made it into this mystical plant. My recommendation for you guys is look at what tomato growers are doing, right? Which may seem weird, but people have been growing tomatoes with like no overhead because the profit margins are so low for decades and decades. And they have a lot of technique and environmental controls figured out when it comes to temperature changing and stuff like that. But really look around besides weed, right? That's the one thing I always try and push here, right? Is everything is marketed to people who were making $3,600 a pound at one point, right? So everything is special and expensive when it's just another ag crop. It's literally no different than growing corn, right? In Afghanistan, go ahead.
Is there a difference? Because, I mean, in history, the plant was also basically used to make rope, wasn't it?
Yeah, hemp is traditionally used to make rope and fiber products.
And paper, like the
Paper.
Constitution.
It replaced pampas grass for paper in Egypt. The Romans Empire spread it around the Mesopotamian area out into Europe and stuff like that for rope building for ships for the most part. But hemp is traditionally the lower latitude, more southern tropical plant we think about. Weed being is actually hemp, which is, it's the same thing, and they'll breed with each other, but they're like cousins, right? They're close, but they're not quite the same. Hemp is from low latitudes, low altitudes, tropical environments. Hemp is a lot of the reason that sativa is the way that it is, it's because it's northern latitude THC strains mixed with hemp on lower latitudes, right? That's kind of where the sativa branch came off of, is depending on altitude. The higher up in the mountain ranges we go, the more indica we become. The lower we go down in the plateaus, the more sativa, and then eventually the more hemp we become.
Soil, what do you prefer on soil, the live soil or
So
bill soil or?
that is going to be a lifestyle choice for you, right? How often do you want to water?
I'm second growth.
Right, so soils are the traditional thing that people step into, right? Fox Farm potting soil is like a traditional one. Everybody's bought a bag of Ocean Forest, I'm sure, at one point in time, right? That's kind of these traditional brands that we get into. Peat is an organic compound that is cell-based, so it's a plant cell that we're growing in, so it'll compost on you as you're growing it, which will change the acidity of your soil. Whereas something like rockwool or cocoa doesn't compost while you grow in it, and it'll stay just as it is start to finish. Soil is easier to start with. To be honest, like, I don't recommend anybody jump into anything overly complex because you feel like you want to try it out, right? A lot of this is technique building and advancement as you go through it, just like anything else in life, right? We don't start pulling engines apart when we're first start out as a mechanic, right? You're changing oil and stuff.
Right.
So soil is easy because it moves nutrient better. Soil is already pre-amended for you. So if you're not providing something that it needs when it needs it specifically, more than likely it's in the media that it'll pull it out and eat it anyways. Soil, they include dolomite into, which is a lime. So that is magnesium, right? 52% magnesium. And then the lime is a calcium bicarbonate, which balances your pH the whole time.
Okay.
Right? Soil is easier to start with. That's why it's a traditional media for everything. The inert medias, I use a straight cocoa fiber, no perlite, no nothing, 1 gallon pots, and I grow 4-foot plants in them. I've been running cocoa since 2010. I made a lot of mistakes, like a lot of mistakes. I cost myself an immense amount of money getting started into it, right? When I shouldn't have been, probably should have been in the soil. But it is what you get used to and what you normally operate. The soil doesn't dry back as fast, and that is the one thing that we are going to talk about here in a little bit is dry back. So it doesn't dry back as fast, meaning that you don't have the opportunity to put fresh nutrient into it as often. Plants eat most of the nutrient content within the first 15 minutes of you putting it into the media. It's not like a long-term
No shit. Okay.
Yeah, it's just like you put a pizza in front of you and you're gonna eat it, right? Yeah, and it does, and it will continue to pull, but you're only putting certain amount of nutrient concentration in because that's what's healthy. The majority of that is pulled away, and the remainder of that is chipped away by the plant because it's not as mobile, right? Like when we talk about phosphorus being on the ladder up here at the top and being immobile, that means it's really hard to get out of the dirt, right? Something like calcium and nitrogen, they're really easy for the plant to pull up and get right into the tissue, and they're really, really easy to push out into all of the plant tissue and stuff. Whereas phosphorus is really hard to get. You're realistically only using, in a standard fertilizer, between 9 and 12% of the phosphorus that you mixed up in your bucket that you've applied to your plant is accessible, right? It's not like you're using a mass amount of phosphorus that's getting into the plant. It is slowly uptaken and it's made available over a little bit of time, right?
Okay.
But the available materials in the fertilizer are uptaken in that first 15-minute period. It's just like you trying to eat. That's why when you hear about people like my situation, I have a dosatron which automatically mixes my fertilizer and puts it out to drippers for me. I feed like 8-10 times a day. I feed a low EC a bunch of times a day in small pots. So the small pots dry back really fast, and I'm doing that what takes you guys 2 or 3 days in soil, I do in 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And then I feed them again, and that's low nutrient consistently, right? With the soil, you're doing what's called bulk watering. right? So you're having a bigger container. Most people grow in like 3s or 5s intense with soil. You're gonna water it with a strong nutrient one time, and it's gonna take you a day or two to dry back enough before you can water it.
Before the water in.
Right, so that's called bulk watering. And that's what you're doing, is you're trying to dump the bulk amount of nutrient that it can handle on top of it, so it has enough to make it through A to B. Pulse watering is what I'm considered doing, because I'm only watering for 10 or 12 seconds a cycle, multiple times a day in small pulses. I lose 10 or 12% of the moisture out of my pot over 50 minutes. I put it back in, and that's the cycle. But I'm only feeding at half strength or so too, right? Because it's being eaten as I'm giving it. The remaining soil is, or the remaining EC, which is electrical conductivity. Nutrients are measured, let me start from the beginning. I can get ahead of myself a little bit on this. Nutrients are measured either in parts per million or EC here in the US. Parts per million is on the 500 scale because we don't use metric. If we were on metric, we would be on the 700 scale. So EC is a measurement, it's called electrical conductivity, and all it is it sends an electrical pulse through the fluid and reads it back in. However long it took is the conductivity level. More nutrient that's in there, the faster the electricity conducts back and forth, right? Cannabis with our fertilizer, we are recommending somewhere around a 2.5 or a 2.6 EC. Other brands tell you to push up to a 3.5, but a lot of that has to do with them not being as bioavailable, right? So we're offering you more with less product.
So running, build a soil 3.0, it's supposed to have that stuff already in it.
Yeah.
Is that stuff, can I still use that stuff, or is that gonna make it too much?
In the beginning, that'll make it way too much. So if you're using a full,
I just flipped yesterday.
okay, yeah. So you wouldn't want to start this until probably like week 5 or week 6,
Okay.
right? Because those soils are designed for you just to put water into them.
Okay.
Water, teas. You could run our additives if you like, right? Because these additive products will help with that. But the super soil, the build a soil, that sort of stuff is designed for you to have a big pot that doesn't dry out very often, that's just easy to maintain. And that's why I said it's kind of a lifestyle choice, is what you're gonna figure out the more you do this. If you're somebody who wants to be in there, dicking off all day, every day, right? Those super soils are not gonna be for you, because there's nothing for you to do in there, right? But if it's a situation where I only have enough time to go in there once or twice a week, then those are fine, right? They have long dry back periods, so it means that they take a long time to dry out enough for you to be able to water it again. Whereas something like I said I'm using, or like a Pro Mix for instance, because it's right there, has that perlite in it.
Perlite, yeah,
It's gonna cause it to dry out, which means that you can get in there and you can water it again. Really? So I've been doing this 23 years now, right? And like I said, I've tried basically everything that I could think of at some point in time I wasted money on. And it comes down to what type of time investment, what do I wanna do with this hobby, how much do I actually enjoy doing what I'm doing and wanna spend time doing that, right? And that's really where you're gonna narrow down into. Nothing says that you can't grow really good weed with super soil, right? And like we talked about, it's environment. If you have your temperature spot on, and we're adjusting the lighting, and we're changing our humidity to improve better ripening and stuff like that, you'll grow really good product with it. It's organic. Because it's organic, it's gonna be hard for you to flush the stuff out of it. That's
Right.
where we kind of counterbalance with like, okay, organics are really good. Bone meal doesn't go anywhere because it's phosphorus. Once it's in there, it wants to sit in there. It's not water soluble. The water literally will move around the molecule where it'll pick everything up. You know how you mix Kool-Aid in, right? Let me teach you guys something interesting while we're on the side, right? So we have hydrogen, 2 oxygens, right? H2O. When we take any type of nutrient, Kool-Aid is a great example of it, right? Because we have a dry powder with a color in it. There's no chemical reaction going on to put the nutrient onto this. No chemistry whatsoever, right? What's actually happening is the nutrient, we'll say it's this circle, slips in behind and holds on and hugs it. It literally just holds on to it, right? So that's how the nutrient is actually getting in there. The water's just a carrying agent, totally lost my track when I did that. So I get for dabbing all morning.
We should have a cool picture on that.
Yeah, right, but that's kind of how that works, is we're not doing any advanced chemistry when we're mixing this stuff up. We are just adding it to the water, it hides behind the water. That's why nutrient falls out. If we mix the wrong things up, it'll fall out, it'll make that crust on your tank, it literally just falls out from behind. So
if you have like a reservoir for your feed,
Yeah.
do you suggest having like a bubbler or something like to keep it fresh
That-
and it sit? You know what I mean? Like so it doesn't settle.
So my recommendation, if you have a reservoir that sits around, is to get one of those little hydro pumps
Okay.
and lay it on its side on the bottom. Everybody used to tell you to oxygenate your reservoir, and that's gone out of date because all of the media that we currently use is called high porosity media, meaning that when you water it, it pulls in a bunch of oxygen. So when everybody was telling you to bubble your tank, we were all in really heavy peat mixes
Yeah.
that didn't dry and that didn't breathe. So we wanted to continue to add oxygen to the root zone to make it healthy
Oh.
to fight root rot.
Gotcha.
Now what you're doing in actuality is you're turning your reservoir into a big air filter.
Yeah.
All the dust, the bacteria, the fungus, the algae that's in the air, everything, the water's filtering out for you now.
Gotcha.
If you're injecting CO2 into your area, right, and now you're injecting CO2 into your tank as well, making it anaerobic,
Gotcha.
right? So that's an old, outdated technique.
Yeah.
Still pushed to this day, for whatever reason, I don't know. But every media, it doesn't matter how, whether it's a build of soil, super soil type media, or pro mix, it all is going to balance oxygen for you nowadays. So that's the easiest method, is just a little pump. And honestly, put it on a timer and only have it kick on once or twice a day.
Nice.
Like 2 little 15-minute
Yeah.
cycles is like, if you know
Just
you're
to
going to
stir
go
it
in,
up.
if you know you're going to go in and water at 7 o'clock when you get home, have it kick on at 6:30.
Yeah.
Right? That's all you really need. Otherwise, this stuff should stay in suspension, no matter what brand you're using. So let's go over some of this nutrient mixing and some of that stuff, and then we'll take a break and smoke some weed. If everybody's happy with that. So basically with us, we have 2 options. We have the liquids and we have the dries. If I'm you guys, I know this is another thing that's gonna like go against the grain, but everybody you see online uses dry stuff. That's because they have to mix up at 7 cents a gallon, right? That's because they have to be so unbelievably cheap to make their building work to sell $500 and $800 pounds that they can't use liquid fertilizer, right? Our dry inputs are the same as our liquids. We're just not handling them. It's literally the same thing. We're just not liquefying them. Dry Athena is the same as liquid Athena. Dry GH is almost the same as liquid GH, right? We're just not liquefying them. The problem is we have an $80,000 machine that makes sure this is in suspension and stays in suspension, right? Whereas with the dry, we're relying on you guys to properly mix them. At your usage rates, I recommend the liquids. Doesn't matter what brand, even if you're not buying my brand, I recommend the liquids instead, because these companies and us make sure this product is in suspension and ready to go. If you get a hot spot with dries that you're mixing, it'll cause you more problems over the long run. That's the problem of the era that we're in. When I started 20 some odd years ago, I was buying books and reading them, right? And now you go online and you see so-and-so, like I said, is in a $10 million building and they're doing this. But their overhead costs are so high, they can't afford to run this stuff.
Right.
And that's what it is. It's not that these dries are so much better or that they're fancy or anything like that. They are the cheapest version of all of our products to be able to make sure that we can sell it to those buildings. Ours are the same inputs. Our louder powder is our version. It's an AB grow, AB bloom. It's the same thing. It's just cheaper, right? But then, like I said, you're relying on yourself to make sure that it's in suspension as well as we have done here. Whereas our machine will mix a 2,000 gallon batch, has a sensor readout. If it shows any precipitant in it where the nutrient is falling out of solution, it does the whole mixing cycle again, right? So it scans it, makes sure everything is thoroughly mixed as it's gonna get, and then we put it into a bottle. So like I said, with you guys, you probably have better bet running liquids on anything. So we are a micro grow and bloom. We're set up like this, like I mentioned in the beginning, so that regardless of what stage you're on, you know, you can manipulate that. The micro has some calcium in it. The other thing I'm going to teach you is these numbers on the front are literally whatever we have to do to make the state happy. It's not a representation of what's in the bottle for any brand.
No,
So like this shows you a high amount of calcium or a high amount of nitrogen, right? That's because the calcium product that's in this bottle has a 6% nitrogen. So the state makes us put a 6 on here for nitrogen, right? So be aware of that with brands, right? But we start with the micro, which is all of our micronutrient package and a heavy calcium. Our brand realizes that you are growing cannabis. Calcium is super important for all nutrient mobility inside. I'm sure everybody has been hammered CalMag fixes everything for an eternity, right? And that is solely because weed eats a lot of calcium. That's actually what supports the cell wall inside of cannabis, it's calcium. So micro is mixed first, and then either grow or bloom, depending on what stage you're on, or a combination of the two. Cannabis goes through a bunch of very distinct phases where it's eating differently. When your seed first emerges, let's say we first germinate a seed and we crack it, it has all the nutrient it needs stored in the embryo. It doesn't need you to feed it at all, right? It is good basically until the first leaf pops out. When the first leaf pops out, we can either start with just micro or just a CalMag at about half strength. And it doesn't seem like that's enough because it doesn't have any of the nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, but it doesn't need it, right? It's this building stage of the bigger I get, the more complex nutrient I get until I set into my flower cycle. So like, for instance, you can take 2.5 mils of our micro and 5 mils of our bloom and use it as a foliar spray on your clones or your seedlings, which is just literally like a sprayed application. No nitrogen whatsoever, and that's a perfectly complex food that's enough for clones and seedlings that will help establish better root zones and better green health, right? When you move into grow, you use more and more grow as they get bigger, and we continue to use a little bit of the bloom in there because phosphorus is the driving factor behind root growth. Everybody associates phosphorus with bigger buds. Actually, a lot to do with root growth and cell elongation, more than almost anything. Once we move kind of like into a transition phase where we're just starting to set flower and stuff like that, most people's mistake is they'll move right into flower food, and we won't accept that transition stages are there. But there's a lot of complex action and hormone development that's happening, and I'm sure everybody's noticed there's a lot of stretching that goes on, right? So we continue to use the grow and the bloom at the same time through those transition phases. And we have feed charts that if you guys want to look at them, you know, that make it super easy. But I'm just trying to give you an example of how this 3-part system works. If we can continue to change the ratio of what we're using depending on the stage that we're going in. Then eventually we'll remove the nitrogen product altogether, and we'll run these two. It's just our base through flowering once we get through that transition phase. If you are trying to do a little bit of crop steering and trying to really control the nutrient for better ripening and stuff, you just simply lower the micro down a little bit and lower the calcium down a little bit, and that drops your nitrogen down, and then that's really it. The way we're set up means that you don't have to buy an immense amount of bottles all the time. These things are additives, and I'll tell you, every brand, they are additives because you can add them in or you don't have to. That's literally where the term comes from. So then, like I said, the NPK numeric values, those are basically spot on, but those are minimum guaranteed values, right? So there's probably more in each bottle than what's on the label, no matter what brand you are, but that's kind of how those work. But like I said, it's not always black and white. Like this micro is not a nitrogen product, it's a calcium product, but because the calcium's locked onto nitrogen, state makes us register it as a nitrogen product. So it's a little iffy, but what you can do is if you're looking for something, every product, no matter what brand it is, has it on the back, right, in percentages. If we're looking for calcium, if we're looking for nitrogen, look at this back label. It's more important than the front label. It'll tell you specifically what's in there. pH is one of those things. If you're in a living soil or a heavily amended peat mix, you can go the entire time without ever worrying about it, right? Like we talked about earlier, there's dolomite and lime in there. Dolomite is going to naturally keep that media balanced at a 6. What the pH is doing is it's offering different range of nutrient absorption. So micronutrients absorb better at the lower ranges of a 5. Sulfur, nitrogen, and other things absorb better at 6, right? So when your pH swings one way or another, it causes the inability to eat those nutrients. That's why we try and tell you to stay in a generalized pH range, or it's why you buy a soil that's already amended with it, right? It keeps it balanced. Having said that, if you are getting a little bit more technical with it, there is really good scales for pH on Google, right? You can literally just Google nutrient pH range, and you can move through different nutrients through different phases. We need more micronutrients, calcium and magnesium in the beginning of flower, and we need more sulfur towards the end of flower, right? So what we'll do is the beginning first 3 weeks of flower, we'll just run a pH of 5.6, 5.8, right? Because it's gonna give us more of those nutrients. And then when we get halfway through flower, we'll change our pH up to like a 6.3. It's gonna give us more sulfur. You can make this as technical as you want, really. Like I said, I can talk your ear about it off all day long, or you can make it really basic, right? If you sit at a 6 and try and have a goal of sitting at a 6 generally, you're gonna absorb everything. It may not be the highest peaks of everything, but everything's available. pH does really cause lockouts and stuff though. Sometimes nutrients that you use have a natural super low pH of 3 or 4 just from the way that they're manufactured, and they do need to be brought up. So that is something that you guys should get yourselves accustomed with if you're not already doing it. Meters are pretty cheap. Blue Lab meters, are really accurate for what you guys are doing, and they'll put you within a range. I tell people don't worry about a couple tenths. There's a lot of this, like we used to argue about where your pH should be down to the 10th, right? But if you're mix the bucket up and you're at a 5.8, you're good enough to use. If it's at a 6.2, it's also good enough to use, right? Nutrient stacking might be another term that you guys have heard. And what that means is it's the leftover nutrient after that plant ate. It's the leftovers on the plate, essentially after we fed, right? So if I feed a 2.5 and it eats a 1.5, it means I have a 1 EC left over, which means it's stacking in the media. Every time I feed, if that leftover is there, it'll continue to climb. Really, you're controlling the nutrient depending on what's in the media, right? So how do I know what's in my media and what I'm eating, right? Runoff. So if we catch the water coming out of the bottom of the pot and we compare the pH and the parts per million, or the EC of what the nutrient going into it is, we see that it either ate a bunch of it and we need to add more, or that it's rapidly building up and we don't need to add any more, right? So that's a really good rate to figure out where you're at, how you're feeding, how your pH is adjusting, because if you've noticed that your runoff pH is climbing, you should use a lower input pH, because your plant isn't living in your bucket of nutrient. That's the one thing I'd like to try and get across to people, right? Is it's not living in this bucket of nutrient that we just perfectly balanced. It's living in the dirt, which is, it's a living thing that's going to fluctuate. So that is another real game changer. If you guys are having issues and stuff and you really can't figure out what's going on, just checking your runoff pH and parts per million is a good idea, because you could just be dramatically off. Titration and lockout. Titration is anything that floats to the surface of your reservoir. If we're mixing up nutrients and you get white floaties that appear, a chemical reaction has happened, right? Don't use it. You've lost something. You don't know what you've lost. You don't know what chemistry you just made in there. It's worth you just dumping it out. These things happen when you don't mix things in order, right? A lot of the times people will start using RO water and they'll start really having a lot more trouble than what they thought they were gonna have. And it's because the RO water doesn't have very much energy, and you use a pH up because RO comes out really low, and the pH up locks onto the calcium, creates a fallout, right? Whereas if we would have used calcium, the rest of the products, the pH last, pH would have interacted with the calcium. If that makes sense, right? So there is an order to nutrients. Typically you want to make your pH adjustment at the very end because those are acids and bases, and those are essentially energy for the nutrient. pH is perceived hydrogen. Here's a little fun fact for you. It's not a measurement of acids and bases, it's a measurement of how much hydrogen sits in the solution. The more hydrogen, the more base it becomes, the less hydrogen, the more acidic it becomes. So that's perceived hydrogen is your pH. That's really kind of what we're controlling because that controls a lot of the chemistry for absorption like we talked about. Well, I feel like maybe we should just take a break. I feel like I'm getting a lot of blank stares that we need a break. A week. One thing I'd like to touch about is cannabis naturally grows where the prairie meets the desert, right? That's where we find it. So if we go to Pakistan, Nepal, Afghanistan, like we talked about, and we start looking at where cannabis grows wild, it is in these ranges where it's really dry and it gets watered once or twice a week from the rain, right? Because it's on the prairie, it's constantly windy, clouds come over and they rain, and then they don't rain for a while, and it has time to dry out. It's really important that whatever media we're choosing, minus hydroponics, that we have this constant dry back and wet, dry back and wet. When we go through these dry phases, right? We have the tip of the root, right? What's actually happening is this is the point where new cells come off of the root. Out here on the tip, it actually, what it's doing is injecting a mucus into the dry soil, which moves the particles of soil apart, making a space. And then these cells elongate to fill out the space, and then the process starts again. The mucus is only produced when the soil dries out. So if we have, let's say we have a clone that doesn't want to grow, doesn't want to do anything, and it sits in a constant wet pot, the root zone is not stimulating new growth on top because it's sitting stagnant, waiting for that dry out period, which should naturally happen, which isn't happening. Could be because you're watering too often, could be because your humidity is too high and your plant isn't able to drink as much as it should be. So like we talked about, lowering your environmental threshold down for lower humidity causes the plant to lose more water and then uptake more out of the dirt. A lot of the time I'd like to focus the fact that you guys should change your environment and not necessarily your watering pattern or your nutrient. Right? Everybody chases everything with their nutrient. Every time they have a problem, it was the nutrient they were using or it was the soil they were using. Nobody ever puts blame on the environment their plant is sitting in. Even though, like we talked about, it's the biggest part of what we're doing is controlling these environments. So as we dry back into soil, the root comes down, grows and takes up more space. It's gonna drink more. It's gonna allow more growth up on top because it's regulated by the amount of root mass it has below. Not every media is the same when it comes to root mass. A Hugo block of rock wool is 6 inches by 6 inches. It's the equivalent of 10 gallons of soil. And that little cube. And that's because of the surface area inside of there, because it has all these microscopic pores throughout the fiber, has more surface area. A cup of pumice, for instance, which is one of the ingredients that's made with rock wool, is the equivalent of the same surface area of a tennis court. To put it in perspective. So soil is super easy, takes a lot of it, doesn't dry out as often, but that's some of the reasons that it's easier, right? Some of the reasons rock wool gets to be a little bit more challenging when you're not automatically feeding it stuff is because you're trying to keep up with a lot of water in a little container. Cocoa fiber is very similar. 3 gallons of cocoa is the equivalent of 10 gallons worth of soil. I use 1 gallon pre-filled cocoa bags, which is you're growing really small plants, maybe applicable to you guys, but until you get to an automated system, I'd never be able to keep up with mine. Unless something was automatically watering it, I would have to be in my room all day just waiting to dump a little water on. Try and keep it easy. There's that whole keep it simple, stupid mentality that really does translate through. So what is the difference between cocoa fibers, rock wool, and soil? Well, they dry out different. Soil, like we talked about, is composting plant material. So it's changing and evolving as we grow in it. Cocoa fiber and rock wool are inert. What that means is they don't change, don't have any nutrient composition to them. They are not gonna do anything but hold a root. That's literally, they're a placeholder. That's all they do. Everything that's going on is in your control at that point. It means you're responsible for every little bit. That's where they start to get a little bit more complex. If you're using a complete nutrient system, like ours, or anybody else's, right? You're providing all the macro and micronutrients necessary to support that inert media. So it's not as big of a deal. It just needs to be fertilized every time you water. So if you're not putting it in, then you're taking it out with water, right? And there's nothing there to continue to feed. Our system, because there's no sodium chloride and we don't build it off table salt, there's no need to wash it out in between fertilizings. You can literally run it every time you water, start to finish. And you won't have to necessarily flush it out. Unless you get to a point, like we said, that you're checking your runoff and you see like, oh, my runoff is stacked up to 3 times what my EC input value is. Clearly I've got a bunch built up in there. Then we can add water, bring it down, or let them eat it and give them a couple days without actual food. The clay balls and stuff are similar in the fact that they are a placeholder for the roots to go down into a hydroponic setting. And we're talking about hydroponics. It's a highly oxygenated water environment that the roots are soaking in, which means they cannot get away from the nutrient and it doesn't flush away from them, right? So hydroponics mean that you need to use 50% strength nutrient to start with, right? It's very mild, somewhere between 700 and 800 parts per million, which is like a 1.5, 1.6 EC, right? So it's super, super mild. Nutrient solutions are a little bit more of a challenge. Not to say that some of you won't get into it at some point and like it. There are just some people who enjoy growing like that. You have to have a complete calcium, macronutrient all the time that they sit in. That's mild, like I said. It's really important to have some sort of water chiller because you're moving the liquid all the time with pumps. The pumps are hot, they increase the water temperature. That can cause bacterial growth, which is pathogenic because your water is heating up and that's what they're sitting in. Also can cause lockout in extreme senses because there's no media to buffer the nutrient back and forth. There's a learning curve with it. Let me just put it like that, right? Like don't expect the world on your first one when you try it. You know, like everything else, there's going to be a lot of learning that goes involved with that. Really, the thing that I can stress about, regardless of what media you guys choose to run, is you gotta let that shit dry back, right? Nowhere does weed grow successfully in a bog, right? It's because we find it in the world where we find it. It's developed for that type of root zone. Rains, dries, right? And that's what we're trying to mimic. Keep in mind, we're trying to mimic really nice outdoor conditions all the time, regardless of what we're doing. What type of outdoor conditions? Type where weed comes from, right? For example, I'll give you a short story. About 15 years ago, I was growing what was called the bomb threat Bubba Kush. Sold a lot of it for a long time. If you've smoked it in this area, you probably smoked mine. Nobody could grow it. Everybody.
What strain was it?
Bomb threat Bubba.
Oh.
Yeah, so nobody could handle it. Nobody could figure it out. I started looking into it. What's the average rainfall in Afghanistan? What's the average temperature when they grow? Adjusted my room up to 90 degrees and had a humidity of 50%. every plant in the room died minus it, which perked up for the first time. Right? It has extreme drybacks, but when we look at where it comes from, high mountain ranges, northern Afghanistan,
Right.
can't remember the particular area of Afghanistan they tracked that one back to, but it's really dry all the time. So there's environmental factors that you have to follow that lead with each different type of genetic. And that's just like, wants to be hot, wants to be dry. Some of them don't like that, some of them do. It's really, I'd love to give you guys this cookie cutter, like go home, do this. You guys are all gonna be successful, but your room's 72 degrees, your room's 76 degrees, your room's 68 degrees on the outside of your tent. Condensate's different, your humidity's different. You gotta play with it. Your genetics are different. Where do they come from? What type of environment did their great, 100 times ago grandparents come from when they actually came out of the wild, right? Things like gelato, really like the dryback. Things like runts, want a high EC, they just do. Any of bee leaf stuff that he sells wants super high ECs. All the genetics are different, and that's where the learning curve comes from with a lot of this stuff. Is you guys, there's no cookie cutter answer for any of you, right? So basic cannabis botany, right? So let's go over what the rhizosphere is, and then we'll work our way up. So the rhizosphere is the area around the root mass, right? Everything to do with this root mass and the media around it is the rhizosphere. It grows because the soil dries out and it's looking for moisture. If it has moisture all the time, it has no reason to look for it, so it's just gonna chill. If you look at hydro roots, they're really small, they're really stringy, and they don't have the lateral branching. The lateral branching that you normally see off the roots are filamentary fibers looking for water. The more of those it puts out, the more when you water it, it's able to hold that water from going through the pot for a little bit so we can drink more, right? That's why that media preference in what you're doing is so important. It's like, run a super soil, that's great, right? But let it dry back in between. Don't constantly keep it soggy. Same way with people who are running high inert medias, don't keep it dry all the time. Cocoa wants to be wet all the time after the plant is done rooting, right? And what I mean by that is you'll root for the first 3 weeks of flower while you're stretching, and then that root zone stops growing. Just naturally does it. So at that point we can keep the media wet because then we're always keeping water to it, right? Most of the micronutrient content cannabis gets is called microphagy, is the process that's moving it in. And that is that bacteria and fungus in this outer range eat micronutrients. And then inside of the root itself, when we look at the actual root, there's a hollow space with a bunch of pores right here. The bacteria actually inhabit this area inside of the leaf, or inside of the root. They're actually bringing those micronutrients they've digested right inside of the root. And what we found out is cannabis is one of a couple of weird plants that actually eats those bacteria. So it's not like, we've always thought that it gives them a little sugar and it swaps out, we have a little party and then we all go our separate ways. But what microphagy actually is it's eating these in a carnivorous fashion. It draws them in with sugar because it wants everything that they're eating, and then it draws them up into the plant, consumes them actually, and breaks them down. Kills most of them. Some of them will escape back out and repopulate again. That's why a lot of the inoculate companies, tea companies, stuff like that want you to continue to reapply their product, is because your plant is actively eating them. It's carnivorous. Same way Venus flytrap is carnivorous, cannabis is with bacteria and fungus, right? So this is why I don't suggest anybody try to do the sterile growing technique. I'm not gonna sit and bash other companies, but some other companies push this whole sterile product all the time, and they wanna grow sterile, they wanna do this, that, right? Nowhere in the world is anything sterile, right? There's over 1 trillion bacteria per tablespoon of soil in healthy soil, per tablespoon, right? Nowhere in the world is sterile. we're eliminating the ability to absorb micronutrients on a healthy level by running sterile in our media. You can synthetically give them micronutrients, which are complexed on potassium and other things. We all do it, right? But this is the natural process that's actually happening. So what we've got with the roots is when we dry back, we get fuller roots. Phosphorus is pushing these filamentary fibers and the branching. So like when I mentioned that you can use our micro and our bloom for a clone solution to spray them and stuff, you can also use it to saturate whatever plugs you're using. When they hit it, there's a dense level of phosphorus, which causes immediate root branching, promotes better roots. Nitrogen does nothing for clones, does nothing for seedlings. It's like plants when they first evolved back in the, the dinosaurs and stuff like that, only ate phosphorus. They did not consume nitrogen, they did not consume trace minerals. Very first plants on the planet only ate phosphorus. That still lingers in every plant today, the breakdown for it in its roots, essentially. So after the rhizosphere, we look at the stem, right? What's the stem do? Inside of the stem, I'm sure we all have seen it. Sometimes they're hollow, sometimes they're not, but there's white in there. Kind of looks like a donut most of the time. This is a xylem, right? This is the area that's actually moving nutrient from the root mass through the plant.
A xylem?
Xylem, yep. These are actual horticulture words. There's a funny thing with weed, right, where we've made up a bunch of words. Like
That's
clones,
everything.
for instance, right? Clones is not a real term. A clone is a propagule. Because we propagated it from a mother plant, it's a propagule. Yes.
Oh,
Right? So we've made up a bunch of botanical terms because we're all outside of the educated horticulture industry. None of us are classically trained in horticulture, so we don't know any of the correct terms. We just know the techniques that they're doing.
Do you think there is any demand in the industry for someone with like an agronomy degree or something like that?
Every commercial facility has an agronomist or a consultant that works with it. There's a lot of very intelligent people who've graduated from horticulture degrees who've now moved into cannabis that make a lot of money doing that.
Okay.
Because there is a demand now for real science on everything. This whole my buddy does this thing has stunted this industry for decades. Right, the bro science thing, exactly. It has limited our progression because none of us have looked outside of the cannabis industry. None of us give shit about what tomato growers are doing, right? Even though tomatoes and cannabis eat the same way, they like the same environment, they are a high value production crop, right? None of us care though, because it's not weed.
I can tell you this, my tomatoes and wheat grew real nice together.
Yeah, they do. They do right next to each other super well, right? So this is a xylem. This is responsible for moving nutrient, like we said, from the root zone up. There's also transport bacteria, the microphagy, up to the top of the plant. Typically when you have a hollow stem, it's because you didn't feed enough calcium. This material through here is mostly filled up with calcium, right? So when you think about a plant cell, if anybody has ever looked at a plant cell in a book, this is what you've seen, right? Square top-down look, right? This is no benefit to anybody, literally. Let me erase this. What we all should have been taught is this horizontal view of cells. Right? So we have a cell wall, which is this solid line right here. We have the interior cell organelles, is what they're called. Those are the process. Those are the little organs in each cell independently, right? That allow calcium, nitrogen, and all of the photosynthesis process to happen, right? This area, the squiggle in the middle, is called the lamella, right? As fun as this is. And that's packed full of calcium, essentially. So what supports these walls on these square cells is calcium.
So it's kind of like our bones with calcium.
It's very, very similar, right? The xylem is kind of like the bone marrow,
Yeah.
right? And then the stalk and everything else is kind of like a bone. It's very similar in the way that works.
Pretty interesting.
When we don't have enough calcium,
Our
right?
bones are fragile and
We see
frail.
cell death, right? CalMag deficiency shows up as a burn on the lead, right? Why Why is that? Because there's not enough calcium in the lamella anymore, and there is an enzyme that's produced that wants to consume this cell to get the calcium out of it for the rest of the plant, because there's not enough. So that's why we get that brown necrosis. You know, that's why you see the brown burnt edges when you start to get a calcium deficiency. Not only do you see purple stems and stuff, but you also get that.
So it's probably too much nitrogen, not enough calcium.
It doesn't matter. The nitrogen volume at that rate won't matter, right? It's just not enough calcium to keep this area of the cell full anymore and plump. So it starts to shrink and wilt a little bit, and then the plant dissolves it. It literally dissolves and eats this cell because you're not providing enough. That's typically why you see that brown patching on calcium. If you grow squash, right, and like you have other outdoor gardens, you see that your squash leaves will yellow and then a big chunk of it will brown and turn into necrosis. That literally is this lamella dying, every cell independently. Because plant cells are built like they are with this cell wall, right, we can propagate it. We can slice it on both sides, right, and we can take the cell and grow it back out to a whole new plant. Unlike our cells, which have no cell wall, right? So that also is a really good idea to make sure that when you're cloning and propagating, that you're giving your mother plants lots of calcium, right? There's a rhyme and a reason to what you're doing, and it's more than just like, my clones didn't look very healthy and then they all died, right? It's that your mom wasn't nutritious enough to support that through that cloning stage.
That makes sense.
Xylem can also be affected by genetics, so don't let me get you wrong. It's sometimes when they're hollow that is genetic, and that's because of fast-growing fiber hemp. There's a mix of fast-growing fiber hemp in all the genetics because of 16th, 17th century breeding, right? It's in everything. When they grow really fast, they have hollow stems. That was chosen specifically because when they beat the fiber apart for strings, it comes apart easier. So there's also that to try and keep in mind. But typically, any modern THC dominant cannabis should have a solid full stem. When you look at leaves, I'm gonna draw you a terrible pot leaf real quick. This is just terrible. It's like a turkey at Christmas or Thanksgiving, right? So this is the petiole, right, that we had talked about, the little branch that holds the fan leaf on. When you look at leaves, there's a couple different actions that happen with nutrient. When you see problems out here, right, on tips, that's typically meaning you've got too much of something, right? And that the reason is the roots absorb it. We go up through the stem and the xylem. And it wants to get rid of it, so it pushes it as far away from itself as it can get, which happens to be the tip of the leaves, right? When you start to see problems down here or in here, deficiency, and that's because it's next to the petiole. It's pulling nutrient into the petiole, and the first place it does that is the base of the leaf or the middle of the leaf. Leaves should be green all the time. Some of them can be purple. It's an argument we'll get into later. Fan leaves are big photosynthesizing factories, like we talked about earlier. This is a solar panel. The more of these solar panels I have, the more charge I get on my battery, which is my bud. I am not one of these avid pickers all the time. There is no response that that plant evolved for you to pick it to be healthy, right? It's growing those leaves in the way it does it because it comes from a certain environment and that's what it wants, right? Like we had mentioned, bottoms, middle stuff that blocks oxygen transfer, makes an unhealthy center, sure, pick them out, right? But this, like, I hit day 21 and shark mouth tells me I have to pick all the leaves off, right? You don't. Exactly, right? So there's these common factors that you hear on Instagram, which is literally just fake news. I'm sure we're all tired of fucking glad the presidency thing is over because we're tired of the fake news. But like it just continues on here, right? You want to pick leaves off? Great, right? Do it at the end of flowering, so you don't have to trim them. Do it in week 6, where it makes sense. You've grown your bud. You've done all of the sizing. You're moving into this ripening phase, right? You're not going to get any really bigger. You'll get more dense, right? But we can relive these so we don't trim them later. So if you look at a cannabis plant, right? I'm just gonna do this for fun, just to make it easy. We have a bottom, a middle, and a top. Nutrient is not stored equally throughout the plant. Some nutrients are only stored at the top, some nutrients are only stored at the bottom. Micronutrients, for instance, are only stored in this middle band, right? So if we've grown our plant out with flower and we picked off all the leaf, we've removed all of the stored micronutrients from it. We've relieved all of the sugar and carbohydrates, which are stored on the bottom, and we're expecting this top, which is designed to process these nutrients and then store them down here, to do everything for us. If that makes any sense, right? Some fan leaves are full of iron, other fan leaves have none. How do you know which ones? It's really hard when you pick them all off, right? The other thing that goes against new gardeners and pruning is if you have a problem with nutrient or anything, it's going to expose itself in the leaf. We've all seen leaf burning and damage. Those leaves aren't there, where does that problem end up?
On the ground.
Inner leaf in the bud, right? It's got nowhere else to go,
Yeah.
right? If I got too much nutrient and I'm burning and we went through and picked off all the fan leaves from the tent, nowhere to burn but the bud, right? So there's actually a very big benefit to leaving these leaves on, because not only can it eat it later on when it needs it, but if it has a problem, it can put it out in there anyways. None of us are smoking the leaves, none of us are making hash out of these fan leaves, right? There's no point to it. They burn, right? But if they're there, they'll burn. If they're not, you'll have flower problems. So there is a lot of this, constant social media, constant commercial application stuff that you guys are all exposed to that isn't applicable to what you're doing, because you're not trying to grow a bulk bush light quality product, right? That's why I was explaining up at the front of the store. The commercial market is designed for the bush light crowd. Craft beer drinkers are very small and very few in between, right? So the major beer markets push out cheap garbage beer because that's what they know they're gonna sell. Same thing with these guys that everybody loves to watch on Instagram. They're trying to push out $500 pounds, right? That's why they're doing what they're doing. That's why they're using what they're using, right? It's because they're only gonna get $500-600 a pound for it. And it costs them $400 to grow it, or $450 to grow it, right? So the margins really aren't there. That's why they skimp and do the things they do. That's why it's hard, because everybody wants to mimic who their favorite online celebrity for weed is, right? That doesn't mean that they're growing or having the same intention that you guys are having. Yeah, so pruning, I am kind of against it, right? Like I said, there's a certain level of plant health where we want air to penetrate in and get around, right? But there's a lot of use to those, especially when you get later and you see that they start to yellow on the inside because the plant is consuming them. That's their point. Everybody hates to see the yellowing. We all have this idea that my plant should be green and healthy top to bottom all day, every day, till I cut it down and kill it, right? But those leaves are there to turn yellow. They're there to store that for later on. This is the winter fat, right? When shit gets hard, you don't have enough food, I'm gonna pull it out of this fan leaf. If that makes any sense, right?
So what's your canopy look like? You leave all the top ones and then mid and like bottom section you kind of just
I will
skim.
thin it out enough to make sure that I have good airflow, right? But it is thicker and bushier probably than most of you would like to look at, right?
Hey,
And then I get to about week 6 or so, depending on how my travel schedule looks, and I go through and I strip it.
On week 6?
Week 6, maybe week 7, right? So I don't have to trim it later. There's a lot of benefit there. That's why I'm trying to kind of demystify the techniques and what this industry has made this, right? Because these fan leaves, man, like they're super fucking important and we all just pick them and throw them away. The other thing is you purchase the nutrient to make this fan leaf. You've purchased the nutrient that's stored in this fan leaf, right? And you're throwing it all away for nothing, right?
Right, man.
Just
So-
blew my mind, man.
Well, it's more than a garden technique. It's a value to your pocket, right? We're spending money on all of this, and like I said, the people you're watching online are not doing the same job as you. They are not having the same goal. They don't give a shit. They all think their weed is the best, whatever, blah, 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 right? But like, you know, that's not the market they're selling into. You know, if you look at like the Oklahoma market, nobody will buy anything over a $30 ounce. You can have the absolute highest quality weed that you've ever seen in your life, nobody will buy it. When it goes stale on the shelf and they put it on sale, it'll sell out. Those are the people you're watching online. They don't care. They're trying to put green product in bags to people who don't know any better. Right?
If you outside grow and you are trimming, would it be good to just let those leaves at the base of the tree to rot and break down?
If you see them yellow and stuff like that, it's fine to pick them off because the nutrients out of them. I don't typically recommend you mulch with any type of leaf because it is decomposing, and a pathogenic fungus might move in and start breaking those fan leaves down, which then it's accustomed to eating cannabis, and your plant is right above it.
Okay.
Right? So that's one of those things. They're fine to compost somewhere. I used to feed mine to my pet rabbits. They loved them. Well, you know, I feed the rabbits and then collect their manure and feed it back to my plants.
Do you top your plants then? So hot, like...
You know, that really depends on what style of canopy you're going for. If I do top, I wait until my propagules or my clones are 5 nodes tall.
So you still have all 3 of your sections?
So well, when they're this big and they got 5 nodes, you can take the 5th one off. You've got 4 branch sets that emerge. So now we have 4 tops. If we wait till those all have 5 nodes again and pick every branch one more time, then we have another branch set of 4, and we end up with about 16 even tops as a flat bush. 4x4 technique.
Do you have product for outside grow or?
No, it doesn't matter. That is another thing that I'll break down to you guys is the indoor products, outdoor products. It's all nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrient. It's marketed to people who used to make $3,500 a pound that want to buy different stuff.
So is there anything wrong with using triple 12?
Yeah.
Well, you look at input quality, and like a triple 12, for instance, is going to have a lot of heavy metals and stuff, and it's not necessarily designed for you to smoke it, right? And that's where you really start looking at your inputs. So like our phosphorus and potassium comes from the same company that make us for Gatorade and Sobe drinks. So ours is designed to work in the human body.
Okay.
Right? So like a triple 12 is not designed for you to necessarily smoke it, consume it. A lot of the garden products that are safe, right, are tested on your stomach lining, not your lungs. Sure, it's safe to spray it on a tomato that you're going to eat. Your stomach acid will break it down, but nobody's testing it on smoke, right? So that's kind of what separates us, is our product is tested through the third party to know what's in there. For instance, we don't have iron EDT. Every other brand in here is going to have iron EDT. We don't have it because that's what you flush at the end. You're not flushing out NPK, you're literally flushing out iron. If you have black ash, bitter flavors, stuff like that, you're tasting the iron, it doesn't burn. So we don't put it in our fertilizer at all. We use iron DPTA, which is the same that they use for like multivitamins and stuff. Right, if that makes any sense. But
Yes.
your 12-12-12 is gonna have a lot of extra stuff with the low quality inputs because it's a cheap 25-pound bag that's like $6, you know what I mean? If you're using it on turf that you're never gonna touch, it'll love it. But you know, then it's really a matter of preference too. Some of us eat organic and some of us eat like shit, so.
I got a question.
Sure.
Is there such thing as like genetic breeding? Because what I've been experimenting with now is taking a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone. I'm on the 6th generation of the clone.
I have Big Bud that was germinated in 1982 still. I have Karma's BX4 Sour, which is 35 years old now. I have the Wing Wang Sour Diesel from 96. No. What happens is you have a deficiency in UV light, which eventually leads to an immune response problems.
Oh, okay.
Right? So literally, if you have a plant that you think like, oh, it's kind of getting weak because I cloned it too many times, throw it outside. You'll notice it'll grow an entirely different pattern of leaf, and that's because it gets reinfused with all the UV and stuff like that. take it back inside and start cloning again.
Oh, nice.
Like there's no end to it.
That's why.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so that's throw them outside, wait till the leaves change shape, because they'll change as soon as they start growing outside. That means it's got enough UV light back to it, and the immune deficiency will start to go away.
Oh, okay.
Mother Nature's the best medicine.
Yeah, sometimes that's literally it, right?
When's the first year I can go outside?
Flower formation, male and female flowers. My little spiel to you guys on feminized seeds. So feminized seeds are super common. You guys don't want to fight through males. You bought 10 seeds for 120 bucks. You don't want to throw half of them away. I get it, right? But let me show you a little bit about plant breeding. So if we have a really big fat fan leaf, and I breed it to a sativa, right? My next offspring will be a combination of medium-sized leaves, sativa leaves, and fat leaves. Whereas if I take that fat leaf, F1, first generation seed, and I back cross it to the fat leaf again, I'm gonna get way more fat leaves, a smaller amount of skinny leaves, and a smaller amount of those mid-sized leaves. I can continue to breed generation after generation until every single plant has big leaves, right? Super common, we all understand that? If I take a female with herms, and I breed it to another female, and then I take that female and I breed it to another female with herms, and I take that one and do the same process, why don't I end up with a plant that always herms? You don't. You're breeding in these genetics. These constant herm seeds that everybody likes to buy that are like 30 generations of
They're getting
females
breeded in.
are bred in.
Yeah.
It's not your problem, right? I love that online. You did something wrong, my genetics don't herm, right? Well, you've been mixing females for 15 generations, why wouldn't it? Right? Back in the day, you used to sort your males out and never have problems. I have, 15 years ago, I'm sure like Chip, you guys have grown forever. You used to be able to leave your door open during your flower cycle accidentally and like miss a night cycle and nothing would happen. You would have equipment randomly flip on, nothing would happen. Now you get a pinhole, everything herms. It's your fault. It's not the breeders, right? So
I heard originally fem seeds were developed for breeders. Like they weren't really meant for like the end grower.
yeah,
They were
totally.
developed so to help the breeding process.
Right. So cannabis for the last couple million years, male and female out in the wild, over and over and over. The herm thing came from hemp in zones that don't go 12 and 12, right? So if we take hemp and we put it in Vietnam where the light is basically 12 and 12 all the time and there's no fluctuation, doesn't have that high and low, causes these stress problems, right? That's where the original thing came from, but it's a very recessive trait. So that's my thought. A couple of you have asked me about herms. That's why I'm going through this real quick. It is a bred-in thing. You're never going to get away from it if you buy fem packs. If I buy a pack of indica seeds and I have an expectation that I'm going to get a sativa out of there, I'm going to be sadly mistaken, right? Right? It's the basic same thing. If I'm breeding purple buds and I expect a green bud out of a pack that's supposed to give me purple buds, that's my problem.
That's a bad
So flower formation, males are typically quicker than females, now that we're on the subject and we're cracking regular seeds. Males are the first ones to show. Typically, if you germinate a batch of seeds and you have one super vigorous plant, or a couple super vigorous plants on the side that have longer internoding, probably be males. They will show up before the females. They will not dump pollen until they're 3 to 4 weeks into flowering. So it's really not that scary, right? If you're really concerned about it before you go into the flowering cycle, you can cut a branch off, throw it in a glass of water, and stick it in 12 and 12 with no roots. And if it's a male, it'll flower. And then you can just throw the plant away right off the bat. Right? You don't even got to throw it in.
Hey, how long are seeds good for?
Autoflower seeds have a thicker shell. They're good for like 7 to 8 years. Typically, you want to use seeds within a 3-year span. Not to say that you can't get old ones to germinate.
Because you heard about the Judean date palm tree seeds.
Yeah, and there's a company that's out of Oregon that I've been working with some stuff that I've been experimenting, but they have germinated like 1,500-year-old rice. They've done like 2,000-year-old corn now and stuff like that. So there's definitely ways to germinate old seeds. But the viability level is for about 3 seasons outdoors, right? That's kind of next season isn't good enough in the spring for me. I won't germinate. I'll wait till the next year. Females will start to flower. We put them into 12 and 12. I like to break the flower stage into 3 different things. Most people say I'm in flowering, that's 1 stage, right? But I break it down into a transition stage, which is about 3 weeks. This is where the plant is stretching and rooting the most heavily in its life. It gets the most growth, the most root growth in the first 3 weeks of flowering. Then we move into what's called the bulking stage, which is where we're putting on flower mass, shape, and size. And then the last stage is about 2 to 3 weeks long, depending on the genetics, and that's your ripening stage. Calcium, magnesium, micronutrients, super important in the transition stage, into the beginning of bulking stage. And then they're not so important. There should be enough built up in the plant and in the fan leaves we didn't pick off that we don't need to continue to supplement that. So we can pull that back and not give them as much calcium, and that'll remove some of the nitrogen from the flowering cycle. Nitrogen is a flowering inhibitor because it's meant for growth, right? It's important for the first 2 to 3 weeks in transition because we are growing. We don't want to cut that nitrogen out. We want to keep using grow through that first 2 or 3 weeks while we're bushing and stuff. It'll give you fuller, healthier, bigger plants when they finally start rooting 14 or 15 days after, or flowering once they're 14 or 15 days after the lights shut down.
So transition, bulk, and what was the last?
Ripening.
Right.
Yep. We want to build our lights up like we talked about with our environment through transition into bulking where they're at their peak. Then after bulking, we want to turn our lights back down for ripening. The sun gets lower and lower all fall. Light intensity dips down. These senses help ripen faster, give you better color and terpene content because you're actually setting them up to ripen like they should.
So what would you say so transitions like 12-12, the bulk would be like?
So your flower light cycle isn't going to necessarily change,
Just say
right?
12,
We're just
12
turning it's 12 and 12.
Turn the intensity up.
We're turning the intensity up through
Gotcha.
bulking and then back down through ripening.
Makes sense.
Same thing with the humidity and temperature like we talked about, while we're going through these huge big growth spurts. The warmer it is, the more they're going to be able to grow, the more nutrient they're going to be able to consume, fuller we're going to get. Then once we get into bulking, we start staging our temperature down a little bit and our humidity down. 82 is fine all the way through, right? It'll be fine. Terpenes evaporate at 76 degrees, right? So if our room is above 76 degrees, all the terpenes we're manufacturing in the flowers are in the air. Sometimes when you walk into the room and you're like, wow, this room is unbelievably stinky, it smells great, it should be in the flower. It's too hot. You're vaporizing it out of the nugget, right? Shouldn't be warm enough to be overwhelmed by terpenes all the time. So if we stage down with temperature and get down to 75 degrees, which when we're balancing VPD on that chart puts us at about 50% humidity, right? We're gonna get better ripening and we're gonna hold the terpene in the nugget where we want it over the long run. Seedlings, kind of skipped over that. I don't like the paper towel method. I never have. These filamentary roots come out immediately when you germinate a seed into a paper towel, and when you pull that seed off the paper towel, you rip all that off. That's a big stressor to something that only has a 1/4 inch worth of roots total, right? You could be removing as much as 15 to 20% of the root mass by pulling it off the paper towel. I like to soak mine in a glass of water until they sink. Once they sink, they're hydrated, they're ready to go into a plug. There's no need to let them germinate in water. That's another negative thing because you'll start not into a media and it'll start creating that hydro-style root zone we talked about from the seed formation. So like as soon as your seeds sink, I like to use either the cocoa plugs. Clonix has got a bunch of really cool cubes that work really well for them in their trays. Those work really good too. And then I bottom water. That's one trick I'd love to teach you guys. Clones, seedlings, they're super delicate. And when we're watering on top, we're pulling the roots down with the water and we're manipulating the roots again, right? Whereas if we take our container and put it in a tray full of water and let them soak up through the bottom, we're getting the same level of hydration without root disturbance. You will notice a difference in the health of your seeds and clones if you bottom water right off the bat.
Because they're not like drowning.
They're not drowning, and like I said, you know, when the water comes down, we're pulling on all this stuff like a sleeve with the water, you know, and we're actually physically manipulating those roots, especially if you're heavy-handed with a watering pitcher, you know what I mean? Whereas if we're just soaking them in a container, they're gonna saturate and then they're good to go. You'll see a big health difference right away with that.
So you soak the seeds, what, 24 hours?
As soon as they sink, normally it takes about 12 hours. Older seeds will take about 24 hours typically. You know, after 10 hours, if they haven't sunk, I'll poke them with my finger or a pen or something, and they generally fall right away. But as soon as they fall, they're hydrated all the way to the embryo, and the embryo is awake and going. Right? Like, so a lot of people, like I said, you only have a 1/4 inch of roots. Any type of damage is significant at that point.
Now, for the water, do you use tap water or filtered water or?
I'd like to try and use bottled water most of the time because
Like
you don't.
spring water or
Doesn't matter. It's non-biologically active. You know, you're just starting a seed. If your well has any type of bacteria, coliform in it from your septic or anything like that, it can affect the seed germination and overall health. So like, just a bottle of water. Same thing with cologne. What's that?
Purified or sprayed water?
Either way, it doesn't matter. It'll all be so low parts per million, and it won't have any bacteria or something, and it makes no difference. Just that's kind of my recommendation for that.
Still pH it?
Yeah, pH is important all the way through. You know, like I said, hitting that 6 is generally the mark. Don't fret about a 5.8. Don't fret about a 6.4. Just, you know, if you're in that range, 5.5 to 6.5, that's why that range is recommended. Everybody will argue about tenths of pH points, but from somebody who sells fertilizer, like, doesn't really make too much of a difference. As you transition into the veg cycle, you're gonna give them more nitrogen, obviously, everybody's aware of that. They like the warm temperature because it causes more rambunctious growth. Transition into FOP, yeah. Anybody got any questions on any of that?
What would you do your life cycle for veg?
You can either do 18 or 6 or 24. I do 24. We talked about that in the aisle. Everybody's got an opinion about it. If you look at the, what's that?
You said 24.
Yeah, just turn them on. Yep. So if you look at the type of plant that cannabis is, there's you know, you look at the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, and it breaks down into different sections and stuff. Cactus, succulents, and things like that need the dark time. They actually have different chemical reactions that are happening in the dark that prepare them for nutrient the following day. Cannabis does not do that.
So you just straight run 24 hours?
I just run 24
So
hours.
put them in the flower?
Till I put them in a flower, yep.
Okay, alright, fair.
Yeah, you're not doing anything by shutting the lights off. In fact, you're eliminating about 25% of the energy that you could have been gaining throughout the day.
That blows my mind. I've always turned the lights off. But
Everybody does.
I guess
It's
I don't
cheaper.
turn the lights
It's
off.
easier on your electric bill,
I
I'll
don't
tell
give
you
a shit
that.
about it being cheaper. I want better weed.
Well, yeah, right?
The thing
Well,
I read is after 18 hours, the plant's gonna rust anyhow, whether the light's on or not, but I don't know if that's true.
so the other problem that we have with this is because none of us are classically trained in horticulture, none of us really know, and we stick our opinion out there, right?
Yeah.
That is the one thing I'm gonna tell you is everybody, including myself, is full of opinions, right? And trying to weed through them and find some actual educational information about that. But if you do look at where cannabis is at on the plant kingdom scale, right, on the chart,
So it actually has no rest. So you can leave
it has no rest, it just keeps going.
That's what it
Just
has.
keeps going, yeah. Yeah, there's places in the world that the sun is out 24/7 for months on end, you know, in Alaska and shit, so. Plants.
So I have a property, and the best growing thing on there is weed. I mean, just not what we're talking about, weeds.
Yeah.
And that's what makes my place green. So they I don't do anything to them and they grow like hell, so is this the exact same way?
Yeah,
Or close to?
it's close to it. Again, the weeds that you're not fertilizing and you're not feeding
Right.
are established with the microphagy system. They're creating sunlight, or taking sunlight, turning it into sugar, and then on the root mass, they have little tubes that come off that are not filamental fibers that produce what's called an extradute, which is a sugar designed for bacteria, right, to draw them in. Hey, I need phosphorus, I need iron, I need this dirt sucks, right? Go get it for me, I'll trade you some sugar, I'm actually gonna eat you, right? So that's kind of like why those are like that. Classic cannabis from around the world, if you go to Morocco or anything like that, they don't fertilize. They stick it out in the same field that's grown weed for the past 100 years and they do not fertilize. It is a human interaction with the genetics we're currently working with that cause them to be so hungry. Your breeder, again, wants to burn all of his plants and feed in 3 the entire time or 3-5 the entire time. There's a natural adaptation after so many generations that, hey, this is what I'm gonna get fed, and this is what I'm gonna get used to, right? And that's where we're at. And the 90s and stuff, nobody fed more than a 1.8 EC. 2-1 maybe if you were pushing, right? That was it. That's the same thing with the autos. Everybody's so used to this feed autos quarter strength, right? Because they are closer to land race wild genetics than what you're used to with domesticated cannabis, right? But even that in the past 5 years has changed. You don't want to feed autos in the beginning very heavy, but every time you feed them, you could increase 5 or 10% strength, right?
So
Standard.
when you leaving your lights on, do you change keep the humidity high and temperature high?
Yeah, my
Or does that
bedroom is
stress
like
them out?
82 degrees and about
82.
65%, 60% depending.
I was gonna say, so just keep the salmon into much.
You know, but then again, you know, if I know that I'm going to be on the road for a week and a half, I'll bring my temperature down to 76 and leave the humidity up because I know they're not going to eat as much, right?
On the CO2, how much do you got?
CO2 is probably anywhere from the 900 to 1200 range. Anything over that's kind of excessive. I tell most people you should match your par rate of your light, your PPFD, with your CO2. So if you're running 1100 PPFD on your canopy, you're on 1100 CO2. If that makes sense. It's just an easy way to keep things in balance. Light and CO2 absorption are kind of a balancing act, the same way humidity and temperature are a balancing act. So I'll get into my last thing, and then I'm happy to answer as many questions as you guys have today. So IPM management. I'm gonna say something you guys aren't gonna like. Don't take clones from your friends, right? Once the problem is in your room, because your buddy had a problem, then you have a problem for a long time. You can swap clones, but my recommendation to you is to get a clear Sterilite tub, keep it sealed, put the plant inside of it for a week, 2 weeks. Leave it by itself, separate it out. If your buddy has thrips and you've never had thrips because all you've done is seeds for the last 3 or 4 runs, you're gonna fight them forever. It's not worth it.
It's always the female's fault.
Yeah, so like, if you're going to get a problem at your house, you are not going to get cannabis-specific powdery mildew out of your carpet. You are not going to get spider mites out of your house. You are not going to get thrips out of your house. You're not going to get aphids out of there. So if you're starting seeds, they'll never show up, right? It's not something that's just going to randomly show up. But if you got a clone that you got from your buddy, now you're infected, now they will keep showing back up, right? Because you brought them in. Seeds are an extra 2 to 3 weeks, right? That's just kind of a smart, it takes you a little bit longer to get going, but it means that you're not going to struggle through problems. If you have bugs, they are going to suck the sap out of your plant. They're going to steal the sugar that it's making to make better flowers. They are going to make enzymes and acids to fight the bugs off rather than making terpenes. Terpenes are a pleasant chemical that they're putting out there to help draw in whatever random pollinator is out there. The butterflies and the bees like really nice smells, right? They like bright colors. That's why they're there. That's why the terpenes are there. right? We're trying to attract beneficial stuff. If I'm fighting mites the whole time, I'm gonna make chemicals that make me less appealing to the mites and the bugs, which makes it less appealing to your palate, right? Okay, so I took some clones and I have some problems. Now what do I do? My advice to you is, this is the only time I'll say this, is ignore the bottle, right? Whatever product you're going to use, anything that you buy from the store here is gonna be perfectly safe, right, for you guys to spray and consume. I don't recommend neem oils, because there's a lot of research on neem oils that aren't all that great for smoking, so I would avoid that one. But almost any other type of product is really good to use. There's a lot of great plant oils that work. Spray 3 days in a row. Don't give them a break, right? If you're using different products, keep spraying every day, right? One product, new product, next product, start back over after a couple days. 3 solid days in a row. You're going to damage a big part of them, you're gonna kill a bunch of eggs, and you're gonna weaken some. Those weakened ones, if they don't die within a certain amount of time, are going to get healthy again and get accustomed to whatever you've sprayed them with. So like, you may have mites, you may have done a very good job at cleaning them up, but you gave a clone to him, and he didn't do a good job at spraying, now his mites don't give a shit about what you sprayed, right? That's kind of the process. So spray 3 times in a row. And then I got 2 other really kind of techniques for you guys. One is prune it away. If I've got a mother plant that's infested and I cut 2/3 of the plant off and throw it away, I'm 2/3 less infested. I just removed 50,000 mites by just literally cutting it off, throwing it away, right? If I go through that spray process 2 or 3 times and I see a massive reduction on my mom, I will clone off the new material, throw the moms away, start back from the clone again. Prune it away, clone it away. Smaller the plant you're spraying, less infestation you have. If you're trying to fight infestations on big plants, you're not gonna win. It's just too much space. You can't evenly spray everything, you can't cover surfaces evenly like you need to. So definitely, I've seen some pretty bad stuff, some pretty bad infestations, where like you literally will take everything from like right here above the plant just completely off and toss her out, and then start spraying the bottoms that are left. And when she grows back, it's clean again. And then you can clone it and then start back over again. You want to get rid of your moms when you're infested because the bugs will live in the dirt. Thrips, for instance, grow as a worm on the bottom of the leaf, and when they're ready, they let go and they fall into the soil. They climb 2 inches down, and then they turn into that little fly that flies around, come out and lay eggs again. So they're in the dirt. So plant may be clean, but then you leave the mom in there with the same pot, and they crawl back out of it again.
The first mistake I ever made was getting Miracle Grow Stone from Home Depot. That was loaded with everything.
Yeah, right, fungus gnats and everything else in
Spider
between.
mites.
Yeah,
Yes.
there is a price difference, right? When you come to the store here and you buy a bag of potting soil, it's more than it is at the hardware store, but it's also considerably cleaner. It's stored indoors somewhere at a warehouse, it's a distribution warehouse, it's not stuck out in a parking lot somewhere. There is a big difference.
What about my plants out on the porch, bringing them in, since it's cold?
How far into it are they? You only got a couple more weeks left to flower? A week
No,
left?
I haven't, I just bought my lights yesterday.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you should be okay. It doesn't hurt to spray them though, as just a
Like, before I
preventative.
bring them in the house?
Yeah, just as a preventative, yeah.
Neem oil? I mean, they're all.
You can use neem oil, yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, anything like that'll work. I like Trifecta from Crop Control. It's like 9 or 10 different essential oils in one product with citric acid. It works really well. Like I said, I avoid neem oil because there's a lot of studies that say neem oil is actually really bad for you to ingest through smoking.
Maybe you should never do it when it starts to bud, only prior to that.
Yeah, you don't ever want to spray the flower down past week 2 because the oils will get on the pistils and cause the pistils to false pollinate, which turns them orange, and then the plant thinks it doesn't need to swell anymore. Flower swelling is a response to not finding pollen. The bigger my bud is, the more likely it is to find pollen in the breeze.
Yeah, I've never used it before, but that's why I told if you do use it, never use it.
Yeah, you never really want to spray anything past week 2.
Is diatomaceous earth a product you could use?
Yeah, that's a really good product. Yeah, you just make sure you sprinkle it on the dirt. That'll definitely help with those bugs that want to live and larvae inside of the dirt and come back out.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, but that was basically it. I mean, I could probably stand and talk your ear off all day, but like that was my outline. If anybody's got any questions, like I said, I'm happy to answer.
I got a statement.
Sure, yeah.
I feel like you're a game changer. My confidence level from just being here is freaking very, very thankful. You did
Well,
really
thank you.
good.
Good job.
Really
Yeah, I
thank you.
agree. Thank you.
Good
Sure,
job.
there's-
You should write a book.
Yeah, 100%. I would definitely. I'm not a big reader, but I'll read your book.
That's funny. But yeah, you guys should really like when you think about what you're doing, think about what happens in nature,
Absolutely.
right? That's the whole key I'm trying to give you guys is it's nothing special. Just look at what you're doing, and there's a natural response to all these actions you're taking because that's what would naturally happen outside.
Thank you. I really appreciate you guys.